A billionaire CEO walking through the city suddenly stops when he sees four little girls selling flowers on the sidewalk. At first, poverty attracts his attention. Then it was the dresses, which looked worn but clean. And then, their faces. Four identical little girls. Golden hair. Blue eyes. And they all looked exactly like his ex-wife. But nothing could have prepared him for the moment when one of them looked up and said, "Would you like to buy a flower, sir?" What he finds out next will destroy everything he thought about the past, about love, about fatherhood, and about the price of pride. In the early light of a crisp autumn morning, amidst the hum of a bustling city that never truly slept, Alexander Reed, billionaire, CEO, and the face of a multimillion-dollar enterprise, strolled along the wide, clean sidewalks of downtown. Known for his impeccable tailored suits and an air of unyielding confidence, Alexander had long prided himself on his ability to control his surroundings. Even his mornings, marked by precise routines and business appointments, never deviated from the script of success. Yet today, as the sun painted the glass facades of skyscrapers in hues of soft gold and amber, something entirely unexpected pulled him off his well-worn path. Halfway through his leisurely walk, an unusual detour from his routine of chauffeured rides, Alexander's eyes were drawn to a small, humble cluster gathered by a wrinkled, faded storefront. There, arranged neatly by a worn wooden table on the busy sidewalk, were four little girls, each no more than 8 or 9 years old. They were selling a modest assortment of freshly picked flowers, the colored petals scattered about in a chaotic yet heartfelt display. Their tiny stands contrasted powerfully with the sleek modernity that surrounded them. While the city boasted a dazzling array of luxury boutiques and gleaming office towers, these girls represented a raw vulnerability that tugged at the heart as much as it startled the eyes. At first glance, the scene evoked in Alexander a mixture of sympathy and irritation. The girls' clothing, though clean and well-kept, simple cotton dresses in pastel hues, spoke a language of hardship. Their shoes, small and scuffed from endless pavement, told stories of long days spent out in the open, their hopeful faces shining with innocent resilience despite the unmistakable signs of poverty. Alexander's well-practiced gaze, honed over years of navigating the corridors of power, had never before lingered on the less fortunate of society. He was accustomed to overseeing profit margins and strategic mergers. The tiny figures before him threatened to intrude upon that impersonal world with an emotion he had long since locked away. Yet, as he paused at the intersection, something about their presence compelled him to observe further. There was a quiet dignity in the way the girls arranged their modest bouquet of marigolds and daisies, their delicate hands and earnest smiles conveying both determination and a desperate hope for a better tomorrow. Among the four, his attention was inexplicably drawn to the one girl in a soft lavender dress, whose eyes seemed to hold a wistful melancholy that Alexander could scarcely believe existed in such a tender soul. In the midst of the bustling city, her gentle expression, and the careful way she offered a single flower to passers-by, stirred memories that he had suppressed for far too long. Slowly, as if time itself had paused to allow him a moment of reckoning, Alexander's sharp gaze fixed on this small figure. There was something hauntingly familiar in her features. A certain curve of her smile, the light in her eyes, even the way her hair, tied back with a faded ribbon, framed her delicate face. It was as if the very essence of someone he had once loved, someone who had forged the contours of his heart with both warmth and exasperation, glimmered through the innocence of a child. In that fleeting moment, the glamorous veneer of his life, the boardroom victories, the unyielding drive for success, crumbled into insignificance, replaced by a tidal rush of recollection and regret. Alexander's pulse quickened. How could this be? The girl's face danced before his memory, echoing the features of his ex-wife, Catherine. He had not seen her in years, not since the painful dissolution of their lives together, when pride and ambition had driven a wedge between them, leading to choices now mired in secrecy. As Alexander hesitated, torn between disbelief and a longing for answers, the other girls continued their quiet chorus of hopeful smiles, their innocent chatter melding with the clamor of the urban morning. For a moment, it seemed as if the noise of the city had faded into a distant hum, and all that remained was the vivid imprint of a past he thought he had buried. A small voice, clear and unassuming, broke through his reverie. "Would you like to buy a flower, sir?" The question, simple and unadorned, hung in the air like a fragile promise. In that instant, Alexander felt his carefully constructed world shudder. The words, coming from the little girl in the lavender dress, carried the weight of both a child's innocent request and a mirror to his own wounded history. Her eyes, bright and earnest, held no malice, only an invitation, a beckoning to remember what it had been to feel, to care, to be human. In that moment, his heart did a sudden, inexplicable leap, an emotional fissure opening as his pride and guarded residues of past ambitions began to crumble under the sheer force of recognition. It was as if the clock had stopped, forcing Alexander to confront the latent truths that lay hidden beneath the polished surface of his wealth. Guilt, nostalgia, and a profound longing for reunion warred within him, shaking the very foundations of his identity. The bustling city around him, previously a stage for his relentless pursuit of success, now became the backdrop for an intensely personal, disorienting revelation. The unexpected encounter with these four little girls, and especially that one girl whose features so painfully mirrored those of Catherine, was about to change the trajectory of his life irrevocably. The image of the little girl in the lavender dress continued to haunt Alexander's thoughts as he stood there, rooted to the spot on the busy sidewalk. He took a cautious step forward, then another, until he reduced the distance between himself and the small bouquet stand where the four girls gathered. With every step, the din of the city seemed to fade into an indistinct murmur, replaced by the rapid cadence of his own heartbeat. A strange disquiet filled him, a tug at memories he had long since locked away. As he drew nearer, Alexander's eyes moved slowly from one face to the next. In every pair of bright, innocent eyes, in every tentative smile, he recognized shades of a past he had fought so hard to forget. The girl in the lavender dress, whose tender features first stirred an ache in him, now appeared to be accompanied by three other girls whose delicate expressions and gentle demeanors carried echoes of a familiar grace. In the subtle arch of a brow, the curve of a smile, the shine of unspoken emotion, he saw reflections of Catherine, his ex-wife, whose presence had once illuminated his life and, paradoxically, whose absence had tormented him through years of regret and bitterness. Alexander's mind raced. How could it be that these little girls, so clearly marked by hardship and dressed in modest, threadbare clothes, bore such a striking resemblance to the woman who had once been his closest companion? The notion seemed ludicrous at first, a cruel trick of memory or a projection of his own longing. And yet, as he observed the graceful tilt of a chin and the way one girl's eyes sparkled with mischief reminiscent of Catherine's, a cold realization began to settle over him. It was as though the universe had conspired to present him with a living, breathing reminder of all that he had lost and all that his own pride had obscured for too long. He lingered near their small display, trying to piece together the fragments of emotions mingled with confusion. The girls worked with slow, deliberate movements, arranging daisies, roses, and wildflowers into bouquets that they then held out for sale to passers-by. Their delicate hands, smudged by dirt yet steady in their craft, exuded a quiet dignity despite the apparent hardships of their lives. Alexander's gaze kept returning to that girl in lavender. There was something achingly familiar in the way she tilted her head ever so slightly as she spoke to a kindly stranger, or the soft, wistful look in her eyes when she glanced upward, like she was searching for something beyond the current moment, something just out of reach. Unable to tear himself away, he edged closer until he was within waving distance of the girls. A cool breeze ruffled his perfectly coiffed hair for a moment, causing a slight furrow to form on his brow, as if he were bracing himself against an emotional onslaught. In that brief pause, the world around him seemed to continue in its indifferent hustle, but for Alexander time had slowed to a solitary, penetrating focus upon a single fragile thread connecting his current life with the wreckage of his past. In a mix of reverence and disbelief, he scanned the girl's features again. Each one carried subtle hints, maybe a particular glimmer in the eyes, the curve of a smile, the set of an expression, that stirred memories of Catherine's youthful optimism, her gentle humor, and the indescribable sparkle that once lit up every conversation. It was not merely a superficial resemblance. It was as though the soul of the woman he had loved and lost was whispering across the years through these little faces. The shock of the realization cut through him like a shard of ice, rendering him momentarily speechless. The intense sensory detail, the rustling of fabric, the mingling aroma of fresh blooms and urban exhaust, the soft, tentative voices of the girls speaking amongst themselves, merged with his own inner turmoil. As he stood transfixed by the surreal tableau, Alexander felt an unexpected pang of vulnerability. Underneath all his carefully constructed layers of success and stoic composure, there still lingered the scars of old wounds and shattered dreams. In that moment, pride began to crumble, replaced by a dawning awareness of the cost of his previous neglect. Once, he had dismissed sentimentality as a weakness, a luxury afforded only to those who had time to dwell on the past. But now, confronted with these living emissaries of his former life, his own heart wavered under the weight of unchecked memories and regret. Driven by an impulse he could neither wholly comprehend nor resist, Alexander moved even closer. He stepped to the curb near a group of onlookers, careful not to draw undue attention, and paused as he listened to the gentle banter among the girls. One of them, a soft-voiced child with eyes rich in innocent wonder, looked up and met his gaze. In that brief, electrifying moment, she smiled and asked in a clear, unassuming tone, "Would you like to buy a flower?" The question, so ordinary in words yet charged with unintentional resonance, hit him like a revelation. Her voice mirrored the cadence of a long-forgotten conversation, and in her eyes he recognized the profound sadness and hope that he had once seen in Catherine's. A flicker of recognition ignited within him, a spark that compelled him not simply to brush off the encounter or retreat into solitude, but to search for answers. Who were these children? What was the significance of their appearance? And above all, how could they bear the unmistakable imprint of the woman who had reshaped his life years ago? Clutching his thoughts tightly against the intrusions of the impersonal city, Alexander resolved to unravel the mystery before him. The unbidden image of Catherine mingled with the determined faces of these little girls, and with every subtle feature, every shared glance, he sensed that they carried secrets far deeper than their small, weathered bouquets. Amid the clamor of urban life, in the midst of life and death deals and relentless ambition, a deeply personal journey had begun. A journey that promised to unlock long-buried truths about his past, his mistakes, and the unyielding force of pride that had once blinded him to what truly mattered. In the midst of the urban uproar, as if orchestrated by fate itself, the small voice of the little girl broke through Alexander's reflective stupor. Standing beside the modest flower stand, her eyes bright with unassuming candidness, she stepped closer and, with all the innocence of childhood, asked, "Would you like to buy a flower?" Her tone was gentle, almost musical, a stark contrast to the hardened cadence of the businessman's life. In that single question, the simplest of words struck him like a surge of electricity, igniting the embers of long-forgotten memories he had locked away behind polished veneers and boardroom strategies. For a moment, time seemed to slow around him. The steady beat of his heart grew louder as the girl's unpretentious request resonated within him. In the clarity of her voice, Alexander heard faint echoes of the voice he once cherished, a voice that had once belonged to his ex-wife, Catherine. Images of her serene smile, the mischievous glimmer in her eyes, and the tender way she had once looked at him flooded his mind. It was as if her very essence was woven into that brief inquiry, a mirror reflecting back the parts of his soul he had tried so desperately to forget. Alexander's surroundings, the relentless honking of cars, the chattering crowds, the clamor of a city waking to new hope, gradually faded as his mind plunged into introspection. The little girl's words seemed to unlock a hidden door inside him, one that contained all the quiet regrets, unhealed wounds, and unspoken apologies of a past that he had long suppressed. The realization that the innocent girl before him bore an uncanny resemblance to Catherine was almost too much to bear. It was as if Catherine's spirit, indirectly preserved in the delicate features of this child, was urging him to confront the errors of his proud, solitary ways. As he stood there, his pulse thundering in his ears, Alexander's internal struggle intensified. There was a war waging between the man he had become, the self-assured, calculating CEO who believed that success was measured only in profit margins and achievements, and the man he once was, capable of deep, tender emotion and vulnerability. Pride had long been his armor, a protective shell that distanced him from the messiness of personal failure and lost love. But in this fleeting moment, exposed by the humble voice of a child with a simple question, that armor began to crack. He could no longer ignore the unmistakable pull of contrition and yearning to revisit a part of his life that had been marred by regret. The girl in the lavender dress, her expression open and earnest, continued to stand there, her small hands cradling a bouquet of wilted and vibrant petals alike. Her presence radiated a quiet determination, an insistence on beauty even within the hardships of a transient street life. As if reading his silent turmoil, she repeated softly once more, "Would you like a flower?" The repetition, though gentle, carried an irrevocable command, a call to action that broached subjects he had not dared to confront since Catherine's departure. Her visible hope, mingled with an undercurrent of sadness, was a poignant reflection of the love and loss that had defined his personal history. In that moment, a shift occurred within him, a tipping of scales that had long favored unyielding pride. Alexander's carefully ordered world, built on a foundation of wealth and calculated ambition, began to tremble under the weight of recognition. He realized that his pride had not only blinded him to the simple beauties and sorrows of everyday life, but it had also obscured the truth about those very relationships that mattered most. The little girl's question had become a catalyst, a singular spark that illuminated the hidden crevices of his past, urging him to re-examine his choices, his neglect, and the burdens of a legacy steeped in regret. Confronted by the undeniable echo of Catherine in the girl's eyes and voice, Alexander felt a rare, piercing clarity. In the quiet of that defiant moment, amidst the crowd's indifferent pace, he understood that the answers he had long avoided were too vital to ignore. The girl's simple offer of a flower was no longer a trivial gesture. It was a symbolic invitation to mend the fragments of his shattered life. It beckoned him to confess his mistakes, acknowledge the children of circumstance or memory that had faded from his vision, and to take the first tentative step toward reconciliation and forgiveness. With a trembling exhale, Alexander knelt to meet the girl's gaze, his eyes searching hers as though he could find within them the lost promise of his past. Slowly, he uttered a single, heartfelt word in response, "Yes." In that solitary affirmation, heavy with all that had been buried over years of silence, he resolved that he could no longer turn away from the call of his own forgotten truths. The transaction, however insignificant it might appear, a small purchase of a flower, transcended commerce. It marked the beginning of a journey into the recesses of his heart. As the morning continued its steady progression and the city around him resumed its routine, Alexander's resolve crystallized. The encounter had irrevocably altered the course of his day, and perhaps his life. He knew that in order to heal, he must now embark upon a quest for answers. A quest that would force him to confront the consequences of his past, re-examine the pride that had cost him so dearly, and ultimately, rediscover the love and genuine connection that had once defined him. In the hours following that life-altering encounter, Alexander found himself unable to break away from the images of the 4 flower-selling girls. The memory of the little girl in the lavender dress, the one whose eyes had stirred long-dormant feelings, gnawed at him relentlessly. Determined to unravel the mystery that now pulsed at the center of his thoughts, he resolved to learn more about these children. That day, with a mind both heavy with regret and alight with curiosity, he began a quiet investigation of the street and its inhabitants. At first, Alexander took cautious steps. Disguised in a simple jacket and casual attire, far removed from his usual sharply tailored suit and polished shoes, he blended into the urban tapestry. He strolled slowly along the same pavement where the girls had been selling their modest bouquets, stopping at a small fruit stand and a neglected news kiosk. With the hesitant politeness of someone who knew he was an outsider in this world, He began to engage in quiet conversation with local vendors and passers-by. In hushed tones, with a genuine curiosity that softened his once imposing demeanor, he inquired about the 4 girls, asking, "Could you tell me about them? I've seen them here often." An elderly street vendor, his face creased by years of hardship and wisdom, leaned in close and spoke quietly. "They're known around here as the Little Angels," the man said, his voice rough yet kind. "They always work together selling flowers, and folks say there's something familiar about them, a look in their eyes that many can't forget. I've heard whispers that one of them bears an uncanny resemblance to Catherine, your long-lost love." Alexander's heart pounded as he struggled to recall the memories of Catherine, the vibrant woman whose presence, once so significant, had dissolved into painful fragments over countless years. Could it be possible that these innocent faces held remnants of the past he had so carefully tried to bury? Fueled by a mixture of disbelief and desperate longing, Alexander continued his search. He visited a small local cafe renowned for its community ties, a place where people whispered about the hidden stories behind every face on the street. In a soft, low conversation with a regular patron, he learned that the girls often spoke of a missing father in fragments too tragic for a child's tongue. "They ask when you'll come back," the whispered confession went, eyes downcast with unspoken sorrow. "They say he was always busy with work, always too proud to show up. I've seen their photos. They even look like none other than Catherine." The revelation sent a shockwave through him. Each word underscored the possibility that this wasn't a random passing encounter, but a convergence of his own past mistakes. A reckoning with the family he had once abandoned in the name of ambition and pride. The more he delved into the murmurs of the neighborhood, the clearer the picture became. His questions led him to a small community center on the fringes of the neighborhood, where a volunteer remembered a woman who had cared for these children as if they were her own. Over a pot of lukewarm coffee and under the fading light of an overcast afternoon, the volunteer recounted how the little girls would sometimes speak of their father, a man they hardly knew, whose absence had left deep wounds in their fragile hearts. With trembling disbelief, Alexander pieced together the fragments. Although he had once loved Catherine, their lives had diverged ominously after an acrimonious split. Rumors had circulated that she had been forced to leave everything behind, perhaps to protect her children from the harshness of the world she had known. In the years following their separation, Alexander's pride had kept him locked in boardrooms and high-rise offices, oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind, to the existence of those he had once loved. A final encounter with a weathered police officer, who recognized the girls from earlier reports of homeless children in the area, affirmed what Alexander had begun to dread and hope for in equal measure. The photographs and old case files confirmed that the children's features matched those of his ex-wife, Catherine. The officer explained, gently, that these 4 little girls appeared to be living on the streets, surviving on the sparse support of a charitable community. "I've seen some records. There's talk that they're related to a man, a successful businessman who never showed up," the officer murmured, his gravelly voice low with sympathy. In a moment of piercing clarity, Alexander realized with mounting horror and regret that these were not merely stray children struggling with poverty. They were his own daughters, lost, unacknowledged, and raised in the shadows of his own neglect. Stunned, Alexander staggered under the weight of this revelation. The little girl in the lavender dress, whose simple plea for a flower had shattered the veneer of his carefully controlled world, had been calling to him all along. Each of the 4 girls, with their quiet strength and desperate eyes, carried a piece of the life he had once shared with Catherine. A life marred by ambition, pride, and the painful price of neglect. Alexander's mind reeled as he grappled with the enormity of his past mistakes. In that moment, the bustling city seemed to hold its breath, as if acknowledging the quiet tragedy unfolding on the pavement. Tears, unfamiliar yet unbidden, welled in his eyes. The depths of his regret were immeasurable, not only for the lost years but for the lives forever altered by his absence. With an aching determination, he vowed to seek out these children, to make amends for the years of indifference and pride that had cost him the one treasure he had once taken for granted. No longer could he allow his ambitions to blind him to the precious, fragile souls that fate had unexpectedly placed in his path. Later that afternoon, Alexander's inner turmoil could no longer be contained by furtive glances on the pavement. Driven by a desperate need for understanding, and a burgeoning guilt that gnawed at every fiber of his being, he sought a way to learn more about the children. His earlier conversations with local vendors, the elderly man's hushed words, and the soft murmurs at the community cafe had all hinted at a painful truth. These 4 little girls were not random street vendors, but his own daughters, remnants of a past he had long since locked away behind boardroom deals and corporate ambition. Determined yet trembling, Alexander arranged to meet with a compassionate community worker who had often been present at the nearby shelter. He arrived at a modest gathering center in a neglected part of the city, a place where hope and despair mingled in equally palpable measures. Inside, the air was thick with the quiet conversations of volunteers and the gentle rustle of paper as caseworkers made notes. There, in a corner office with a single, weathered couch, sat Marisol, a kind-eyed woman whose soft tone had comforted many lost souls in this very community. "Mr. Reed," she began, addressing him with a respectful mixture of deference and empathy, "I understand you're here because you have questions about the children you saw." Her voice was calm, steady, a gentle anchor in the storm of his emotions. Alexander's throat tightened as he nodded slowly. I need to know about them. I saw them on the street, selling flowers. I recognized something in their eyes, something that reminded me of someone very dear to me. I've been told they are related to me." His voice wavered, heavy with both hope and sorrow. Marisol's eyes glistened with a mix of sympathy and the burden of long-held secrets. "Yes," she replied softly. "There is a connection, one that has been hidden for many years. The little girls you saw, they are indeed your daughters." Her words struck him like a tidal wave. Alexander felt as if the dense layers of his carefully constructed life, layers built on spreadsheets, cold boardroom negotiations, and the relentless pursuit of success, had suddenly begun to crumble. The realization was as profound as it was devastating. He struggled to form the words that had been locked inside him for so long. "My daughters," he managed, the words barely audible, laden with incredulity and a raw, unfamiliar pain. Marisol nodded gently and continued. "After your separation from Catherine, circumstances, misunderstandings, pride, and a series of unfortunate events led to the children being placed in care. They have lived on the fringes of society, surviving as best they could, all while growing up without the love and care of the father who should have been there for them." Her words summoned a flood of memories that Alexander had long tried to suppress, the bitter taste of missed opportunities, the relentless echo of ambition that had blinded him to precious moments that might have changed everything. With shaking hands, he looked down, as if the weight of his past sins could be borne just by that physical gesture. Unable to endure the pang of his own guilt alone, he asked in a choked whisper, How are they doing? What have they been through all these years?" Marisol's response was soft yet laden with empathy. "They have faced a harsh world, Mr. Reed. They sold flowers on the street every day just to survive. Yet they remained kind and dignified. They always maintained hope and resilience, despite knowing so little of the love they deserved. And, if I may say, there is a haunting resemblance between them and your late wife, Catherine, especially in the eyes of the girl who wears lavender. It is as if a piece of the past endures in their very being." At that, Alexander's heart clenched. The face of the girl in lavender, the very one who had so simply asked him, "Would you like to buy a flower?" was now forever intertwined with his long-forgotten memories of Catherine and his own failures to be the father he should have been. He recalled the sterile boardrooms, the endless meetings, and the pride that had built a barrier between him and the most vulnerable parts of his life. In that moment, all his former justifications fell away, replaced by the unbearable truth of what his neglect had cost. Unable to bear the silence any longer, Alexander's voice broke as he murmured, "I'm so sorry. I never knew. I never intended to let pride keep me from seeing you. I His words cut off in a choked whisper as tears welled in his eyes. Marisol reached out with gentle reassurance. It is not too late, Mr. Reed. Sometimes, forgiveness starts with acknowledging our mistakes. The children have longed for you, even if they never spoke of it openly. And deep down, I know you feel the same. They deserve to know that they are not forgotten, that a part of you has always cared, even if overshadowed by regret. With a resolute determination that belied the turmoil churning inside him, Alexander asked, "Can I see them? I need to tell them. Apologize for my absence." Marisol hesitated only a moment before nodding. "I believe they would welcome the chance to know you, even if it may be difficult at first." She then informed him that there was an outreach program scheduled for that evening. A small meeting in a safe, discreet location where the children were given a chance to share their truths with willing adults who could help mend the broken bonds of family. That evening, in a modest community center warmly lit by the soft glow of pendant bulbs rather than the blinding opulence of corporate affairs, Alexander waited nervously. His pulse hammered in his ears as he thought of every moment he had missed, every day that his pursuit of success had come at the cost of his children's right to his love. Soon, soft footsteps approached, and a timid voice broke the silence. "Are you Mr. Reed?" A little girl with determined eyes and an air of both caution and curiosity spoke up. "I'm Lily. I've been waiting for you," she continued, her voice small, yet trembling with unspoken emotion. Over the next few moments, slowly and haltingly, the other girls began introducing themselves, each name a bittersweet reminder of a life that had been lived in the shadow of absence. Alexander looked at each of them. Lily, Rose, Daisy, and one more, whose name he learned was Ivy, and in every one, he saw a reflection of his lost past and a future he now desperately wanted to embrace. With tears streaming down his face, he began to speak softly, stumbling over the words. "I am so very sorry. I was too proud, too caught up in my own world to see what was most important." His voice quavered with the weight of remorse. "I failed you all, and I have no excuse for my absence. But I promise you today, I want to be here, to help you, to care for you, to make up for all the lost time." The silence that followed was heavy but not empty. In the tentative smiles, in the slight nods that carried decades of pain and longing, there was a glimmer of cautious hope. One of the girls, her voice soft yet steady, said, "We always wondered why you never came around. Maybe you were too busy with business, too proud to be near us." Alexander choked on the words as his heart shattered and mended all at once. His confession, the raw admission of neglect, seemed to spark 1,000 unspoken emotions. "I was wrong," he whispered, "and I let my pride blind me to what was nearest to my heart. But I want to change that. I want to know every part of your lives, your hopes, your dreams, everything. If you're willing, I want to make things right." The children listened, their eyes shifting from uncertainty to a fragile openness. With cautious questions and gentle inquiries, they began to reveal the everyday struggles they had faced. The long days on the cold pavement, nights spent under uncertain skies, and hopes that were nearly dashed but still clung on through each new sunrise. Their voices, though small, were filled with determined resilience. One by one, they recounted the stories of their survival, the taste of loneliness, and the silent yearning for a father's presence. A presence they had never known, yet longed for with every beat of their tender hearts. Alexander's confession, his trembling promises of a new start, created a space for forgiveness that had been unimaginable just moments before. The conversation stretched long into that vulnerable evening, a delicate dance of tears and tentative smiles as secrets unfurled and wounds, old and new, began to be acknowledged. In the soft lamplight, as genuine connections were forged and guarded hearts began to open, Alexander realized that true transformation lies in facing the painful truths we hide from ourselves, and that acceptance and forgiveness, both given and received, are the first steps toward healing. That night, after the emotional evening spent with his newfound daughters, Alexander retreated to his temporary hotel room with a head swirling with questions and a heart heavy with both regret and cautious hope. He could not shake the voices of his children, nor the raw confessions they had shared. Every word they uttered had etched the painful truth deeper into his soul. These 4 little girls, Lily, Rose, Daisy, and Ivy, were, in fact, his own flesh and blood. Yet even as their faces haunted his memory, Alexander longed for undeniable confirmation that would cement the reality of what he was beginning to accept. He needed evidence, a tangible connection to a past he had purposely ignored in the cold pursuit of business success. Determined, he reached out discreetly to Marisol, the compassionate community worker who had already broken the fragile yet transformative secret to him. Over a hushed phone call the next morning, Alexander learned that there was further documentation in a local shelter's archive. The shelter, run by a network of quiet benefactors and city officials long familiar with the plight of abandoned children, maintained detailed records of every child who had passed through its doors. Marisol explained that when the children first arrived, the case files had included birth certificates, old hospital records, and even a few faded photographs that had, over time, grown blurred with neglect. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice gentle yet insistent, "I believe we have documented proof linking these children to your past. I suggest we arrange a meeting with the shelter's director. There might be records that can help you confirm what you already feel in your heart." The following afternoon, heavy with apprehension, Alexander drove to the modest building that housed the shelter on the outskirts of the city. The building, a stark contrast to the gleaming towers of his corporate world, exuded an aura of worn sincerity. Inside, the air was cool and scented with old books and antiseptic, a world governed by the resilience of those who had little yet clung fiercely to hope. Alexander was greeted by Director Elena Martinez, a woman whose kind smile and thorough eyes immediately conveyed both warmth and professionalism. Seated across from her at a scarred wooden table, he explained his reason for coming. With a voice laden with both regret and longing, he said, "I need to know. I must know for certain that these children, these beautiful souls, are indeed mine." Elena nodded gravely, motioning him to follow her into a small, private office packed with filing cabinets, old computer equipment, and piles of carefully labeled folders. She meticulously retrieved one particular folder bound in worn leather, stamped with faded letters that read, "Reed Case, Confidential." Opening it slowly, Elena spread out within it an array of documents, photographs, and handwritten notes. The top pages contained a birth certificate with a name that sent a tremor down Alexander's spine. One of the certificates bore the name Lily Reed, along with a recorded date of birth, a date that Alexander recognized as falling months after his separation from Catherine. Deep inside the folder were also several photographs, images of 4 young girls, their eyes often lagging with secrecy, set against a backdrop of modest living conditions. One image, in particular, showed a girl with a gentle smile wearing a lavender headband, the unmistakable features of the woman he had once loved. As Alexander studied these documents, the physical evidence crystallized the long-suspected truth. His heart hammered as he compared dates, names, and familial features. In the quiet hush of that cramped office, the formal tones of official certificates and the faded ink on admission forms acted as a bridge connecting the fragments of a painful past. The documents, coupled with a written statement from a former social worker who had cared for Catherine during those turbulent years, confirmed that the children were indeed born to Catherine and, by extension, to him. The evidence was irrefutable. His daughters had lived their lives without his support or even his slightest acknowledgement. "They are my flesh and blood," he murmured in disbelief, his voice laced with sorrow and a burgeoning desire for redemption. Elena continued, her tone soft and comforting. "Mr. Reed, while these records are clear, I must caution you reconciliation will not be an easy process. The girls have faced a lifetime of challenges since being separated from you. But knowing the truth is the first crucial step toward healing not only their wounds but perhaps yours as well." Outside, as Alexander stepped back into the cooling afternoon light, a torrent of memories began to overwhelm him. He found himself recollecting the tender moments he had shared with Catherine before pride and ambition had torn them apart. He recalled carefree days of youth, the promising glances, and the dreams they had woven together like a tapestry of hope. Now, the reality of his own neglect was unavoidable. The confirmation of their identity had transformed his inner turmoil into the resolve to right the wrongs of his past. Fueled by a newfound determination, Alexander's next steps were clear. He knew he had to reach out to his daughters, to begin the painstaking process of rebuilding the bonds that had been severed by his own arrogance and the corrosive influence of unyielding pride. With the concrete assurance provided by the shelter's records, his plan began to take shape. To make amends, to offer them every opportunity that his vast resources could afford, and, most importantly, to be present in their lives not as a distant figure of authority, but as the caring father they had long deserved. Late that evening, as twilight draped the city in melancholy hues of purple and blue, Alexander sat alone in a quiet hotel room. Before him lay the documents, evidence of both his failures and his hope for a fresh start. The weight of his decisions pressed heavily upon his chest, yet within that responsibility burned a resolute flame, the desire to reconcile, to nurture, and to protect. Every piece of misshapen paper and every line of faded ink reminded him that life did not always offer second chances. Today he had been granted one. With a trembling hand, he composed a heartfelt letter to his daughters, carefully explaining that he had discovered the truth about their lineage and that, though he could not change the past, he was determined to forge a new future founded on love, acknowledgement, and sincere dedication to their welfare. He promised to set in motion a series of actions beginning immediately: a personal visit, arranged counseling, and plans for a long-term supportive relationship. It was, he knew, only the beginning of a long road toward healing for all of them. As he sealed the envelope and pressed it into the hands of a dedicated messenger, Alexander felt the first stirrings of both trepidation and relief. The confirmation of the secret had been a painful awakening, yet it also held the potential to lift the burden of a legacy built on pride and neglect. Now, with the truth in hand and his heart laid bare, he was ready to embrace the future, no matter how uncertain, and to begin the delicate process of reconciling with the daughters he had never truly known before. The day of reckoning had finally arrived. With the weight of confirmed truth and a heart brimming with both remorse and rejuvenated hope, Alexander Reed prepared himself for what would be the most defining moment of his life. Over the past week, he had painstakingly arranged for a safe, neutral meeting space at a modest community center. Its walls adorned with soft pastel colors and filled with gentle lighting that eased the harsh edges of reality. Today, he was set to meet the 4 girls who had unknowingly borne the legacy of his past. His daughters. In a quiet room that had been cleared for this very purpose, adorned with a semicircle of chairs and warm, welcoming decor, the air was filled with a nervous anticipation. Minutes before the scheduled meeting, Alexander sat alone at one end of the table, his fingers drumming lightly on the smooth surface, each beat echoing with memories of regret and promises of redemption. Every document he'd secured over the past days flashed through his mind, a token reminder of what he had lost and everything he now wished to rebuild. Slowly, one by one, the girls entered the room accompanied by Marisol, the compassionate community worker who had been the bridge between the shattered family past and the hopeful present. The soft murmur of whispered greetings filled the silence as Lily, Rose, Daisy, and Ivy hesitantly took their seats. Their eyes, once hardened by a lifetime of neglect and struggle, now shone with a mixture of guarded curiosity and deep-seated longing for validation. Each child carried traces of silent resilience, the faded colors of rundown clothes intermingling with small, hopeful smiles when they noticed Alexander's genuine, trembling expression. Alexander rose slowly, his voice barely rising above a whisper as he began. "I am Alexander Reed," he said, his tone heavy with emotion. I have come to apologize for not being there when you needed me. I realize now, with the bitter clarity of regret, how my pride and ambition kept me far away from the lives that truly mattered." His words, though halting at first, grew steadier as he continued. "I know this does not make up for all the time we've lost, but I beg for your forgiveness and the chance to understand your world, your struggles, your dreams." For a long, heart-stopping moment, silence reigned. The children exchanged glances, Uncertainty warped their faces while tiny eyes searched his for sincerity. Finally, Lily, whose name meant light, found her voice. "Why did you leave?" she asked, her tone fragile yet piercing. "Why did you not come for us?" Her question, simple and raw, seemed to reverberate around the room, every syllable a reminder of years of absence. Alexander's throat constricted as he answered slowly. "I was too caught up in my own world of business and pride. I wrongly believed that success defined me, and I did not see what was right in front of me. A family I had a duty to love and care for. I was selfish, and I let my ambition shut me off from what, in truth, was the most important part of my life." His voice broke as he added, "I am so sorry for the pain and loneliness you have endured. Please, let me try to make this right." Tears glistened in the eyes of Daisy and Ivy, while Rose sniffled quietly, and Lily's gaze softened into cautious empathy. The atmosphere, once thick with solemn regret, began to lighten, the heavy burden of past mistakes slowly giving way to the tender possibility of renewal. Marisol, watching over the fragile reunion, placed a reassuring hand on Alexander's shoulder. "It is never too late," she said gently, "to repair what has been broken. Today, you are starting a new chapter not only for yourself but for these children." That evening marked the beginning of a painstaking but purposeful journey. Over the following weeks, Alexander devoted every spare moment to rebuilding the bonds that had been severed by his neglect. He began by visiting the community center frequently, gradually earning the trust of each girl with small gestures. A shared snack, a newly purchased bouquet of fresh flowers chosen in their favorite colors, and stories of his own childhood that revealed his former struggles and vulnerabilities. Slowly, the guarded expressions on their faces softened, their stances shifting from defensive to tentative acceptance. At family counseling sessions arranged by local social services, Alexander listened intently to the stories of his daughters. Tales of cold nights on busy sidewalks, of fleeting moments of kindness from strangers, and of an inner longing for a father's love. Each recounting cut deeply into his heart, yet also lit a fervent determination within him to be a better man. He continuously reiterated his promise to support their education, well-being, and overall chances at life, a promise he meant to honor in every possible way. He ensured that funds were allocated for their school fees, extracurricular interests, and even a modest but nurturing living environment where love could flourish over neglect. As months turned into a year, the transformation was profound. The daughters, once lost in the shadows of society, began to bloom in the light of care and understanding. Lily, with her inquisitive mind, started excelling in her studies. Rose discovered her passion for art, channeling her emotions into vibrant canvases. Daisy's gentle smile grew steadier as she embraced her role among her siblings, and Ivy, the quiet observer, slowly found her voice in a supportive school environment. For Alexander, every moment spent with them was both a reminder of the magnitude of his previous errors and a beacon of hope that he could now be part of something timeless and transformative, a real family. In a decisive public announcement during a charity event organized by his company, Alexander spoke not only of corporate success but also of personal renewal. With heartfelt determination, he declared the launch of a new initiative to support underprivileged children, a legacy in honor of his daughters and all those who had been overlooked. His announcement, broadcast in local media and shared widely on social networks, was a quiet, powerful reminder that true change springs from the courage to face one's past mistakes and the willingness to rewrite one's future. That transformative journey taught Alexander Reed that pride, when rigidly adhered to, can blind us from the people who matter most. In his renewed relationships with his daughters, he discovered that true wealth is measured not in bank balances or corporate victories, but in the strength of human connection and the capacity to love. Together, they stepped into a future of forgiveness, compassion, and unbounded possibilities. A future where the bonds of family could finally heal the wounds of yesterday. Subscribe if you believe that sometimes pride blinds us to what is closest, and that true love has no boundaries.